Think of the people you interact with every day. Would you want to spend a day in a canoe with them? Hi, I'm Nathan Mercero, CEO of Planning Alternatives. We're a disruptive brand in the financial planning space with a point of view that true wealth has nothing to do with money. Growing up in a small town in Canada, I experienced examples of families with money and without. It started me on this journey of understanding wealth and the idea that spending a day in a canoe with someone could be one of the best investments you could make. Join me as I sit down with leaders, entrepreneurs, creatives, rule breakers, and friends to discover their perspective of true wealth. And maybe you'll start to shift yours. Well, I'm excited today to be joined by Matt Daly. Matt's the executive director of Jackson Hole Writers and also the co-founder of Write to Thrive, an enterprise that brings reflective and creative writing practices to individuals and professional groups, cultivating creativity. He lives in Jackson, Wyoming. Matt, welcome to Day in a Canoe. Great to connect today. You have a number of accomplishments in your history of writing and poetry collections, and also being the executive director of Jackson Hole Writers. Writing is such an individual process. How do you build community with all these great individuals that you're working with?
Yeah, I love that question. Thanks, Nathan. It's a pleasure to be here. I guess I feel that most writers I know who really thrive in a writing life have found a lot of community. It took me a while, especially living in rural Wyoming, to figure that out, that community feels like a really essential part of being a writer or having a writing life, I guess is the way I like to think about it. You know, that where writing is always a part of your life, whether or not there are publications, whether or not you're striving for the next book. But yeah, so I feel like there are, the advantage for writers is we can connect through the work we put into the world. I think many times writers find each other through reading. And then there are a lot of great opportunities, whether it's conferences or readings or different events for writers to gather together. And then if we know each other a little bit, it's like people before you know them, if that makes sense, sort of through their work.
One thing that I've experienced, not that I'm a practicing writer, is the writer's block, which has become this proverbial or metaphorical reference actually for getting stuck at times.
Yeah.
What's been your experience and any insight when you work through some of the times where, the well seems to be a little dry at times when you're trying to focus on creativity?
I mean, personally, like the short answer is turn to poetry. I really wanted to be a novelist personally. I'd been around a bunch of younger writers and I was striving for that and really stuck on two different projects. And then my son was born, 19 plus years ago. And I was briefly a stay-at-home parent sort of through his first summer. His mom had a business that she had to go back to, and I couldn't get any traction. I couldn't push past writer's block on the schedule of an infant. Let's put it that way. Too many breaks to get any momentum for me, and so I turned to poetry back to it just to kind of have some writing happening, and it really really caught on. Which I think for me, what that meant was to just show up at the desk and write every day. I'm doing that right now. I have a friend who who's receiving rather substantial medical treatment, who lives here in Jackson, but is now on the West Coast. And I'm just writing that person a poem every day as a way of staying in touch because I don't know how they're feeling, if they even have the energy to connect. So just sending a little poem and somehow that kind of commitment to writing and sharing something every day feels like it's a way of letting go of the worry that thing is any good at all. Somehow that I think the writer's block has to do with that, with kind of the fear that this isn't going to be appreciated or liked or by someone else. And I think just the simple act of pushing on, and then for me, sharing, like I feel like I'm sharing work with a friend or two here or there all the time as a way of like closing that circuit in a way, and that even when what gets shared, I know is terrible, it gets done in the day, so the block doesn't build up, if that maybe that's a way of putting it.
You're the author of two poetry collections, The Invisible World and Between Here and Home, and the chapbook Red State. How do people respond when you let them know, hey, I'm a poet?
In a ski town, it is the best conversation stopper you can imagine. is really it's fun, you know? No, I think people are curious. I think that, 2 things that happen. Either it's a way of kind of approaching creativity and a way of living part of the day that is not something that's common for some folks, and so it's a surprise when people get curious about how do you even do it? How do you start? Where do ideas come from? Those kinds of questions about the creative life in words. I think in part because 'cause we're all really used to using words, and so what are you doing in a poem that has nothing to do with the way we normally use words? And then the other piece that I love that's surprising is the number of times people will admit that they write poems, in their journal, or I've had that happen. I say I'm a poet and someone will just recite their favorite poem that they just carry around memorized in themselves. Um, so there's this beautiful sort of secret life of poetry that's out there that if you admit that you're a poet, suddenly, um, people kind of step into they share that part of their life.
With writing, it's such a, internal this inside out process,
Right.
and I know just the act of writing something down, physically creating something, it affects only the brain circuitry, the nervous system, kind of the essence of who you are. What have you found in your writing journey of how that process has been a mirror back into you, and any observations or takeaways?
Oh, yeah, I love that. I've been thinking a lot about that question, especially as self-reflection practices, mindfulness practices, meditation practices become more and more sort of prevalent and accepted in different environments. I'm struck by how the writing practice, not necessarily finished product. I don't think of any of the books I've published as like meditation aids or something like that. But the process itself
Well,
feels like it has a mindful or meditative component, and so that quality of self-reflection that happens in deep yoga practice for I don't know if it happens on the golf course, I'm not that, but, like, those places where we're quieter with ourselves, I feel like the beautiful thing that for me about a writing practice is that kind of quiet happens, and then it comes back out as the creative expression. We've talked about that in Right to Thrive a little bit, how writing can almost be like the gelling agent, in the reflective practice. Because you set it down in words and then potentially offer it to other people. That sort of full journey of the reflective and the creative mixed together feels really powerful to me, and sort of melds in a way some of the what we know about kind of the benefits around neuroplasticity. Like there's some science there too that some of what happens in the reflective practice gets coupled with and mirrored with a very small but interesting body of evidence around how writing benefits people's overall sense of well-being and sort of mental and emotional health. I love how those two things get mixed together through this little practice.
at Planning Alternatives, we have a, book club that
Mm.
happens, and our team members suggest books, and we, had the privilege of, having an author actually today join us who wrote a book about a very traumatic experience that happened to a loved one, and how she's wanting to make sure that person is, that situation turns into something that can help others in
Mm.
protecting their personal identity and financial well-being. And I remember hearing her today say that she found that journaling was so helpful in the middle of a very chaotic situation, to just bring like a release out of the body and the mind. What's your insight on that space? Because sometimes we can do work and then we have a stop point and we walk away, and there is a cathartic aspect of just, walking away, but then there's a cathartic aspect of engaging more too. How do you navigate those two bookends?
I guess what I think is that we're feel more and more that we're like story-oriented living things, that somehow story, and then for me, writing as a poet also kind of lyrical expression is the way I think about it, but how we have the capacity to express what's inside outward feels like a really extraordinary quality of lyrical and creative language and story. Yeah, I think what's valuable is I think that pause is actually really, really essential. The sort of fullness of experience, and then that space where the experience gets to be itself as the glorious and experienced and usually kind of absurdly complicated thing. And then as we come into writing, I think what we can do is then sort of craft that full complexity of what happens in our lives into a container that kind of I love how a container, a written container, allows other people to feel the full complexity. It becomes like the sort of the translator, you know? Um, that feels like I mean, I delight in that I just read a novel of a novelist who's coming to the conference this year, and how that novel reflects on identity in a lot of different ways that don't have anything to do with my own identity really made me deeply reflect on my own identity, you know? And I loved how the author's investigation led to this story that I loved that then led to my own investigation. And that so maybe to, you know, what you're saying, like how the story or the creative writing is the second half of that pause between experience and like the reflection on that experience.
Now, you mentioned the Jackson Writers Conference, and that's coming up. We're delighted to be sponsors and partners in this event. What has evolved since you became executive director around your vision for this conference and what it is and what it could be?
Yeah, so I've been at the sort of leadership role at Jackson Writers for 2 years. This will be my second conference. I was on the faculty for many years before that, and so it's this great delight, really, that the conference has been around for 35 years. So there's a very strong foundation, and also kind of what to do now with how to build on that foundation feels like a lively, interesting place to be. I feel like what we're trying to do now is show a really broad range of possibilities for a writing life. I really think about it that way. Oftentimes, conferences can be focused on getting a book published, which we do honor and do a lot of work to help people see how that process of getting a book published works. But I have started shifting my language around what I was using today, like the writing life, for one. How do we live as writers? Which is a little bit different than how do we get our books published? And then also, how do we reach readers? Which I find part of what has happened really dramatically in the last 5 or 6 years, you know, is that I mean, a little bit before that, but it's been very dramatic recently, is the possibilities for how people reach readers are so vast. I mean, a podcast is a great example where there is a compositional component, right? You can publish an 800-page great American novel from one of the big five publishers still. You can work with a tiny little independent press of just a few volunteer people, and all of the ways that there is a passionate community out there trying to get great writing to the people who want to read it. I feel like that's how we're shifting the conference is more toward helping aspiring authors see a fuller range of possibilities. Um, in part, if they have like strong writing goals, that the sort of traditional model with the large publishers is very, very difficult, and it's a beautiful goal. And there are a lot of other ways to move through that process so that you can feel like you achieved your goals as well, you know?
There's a clear trend that has been going on for a number of years within technology and has culminated in artificial intelligence being
Yeah.
a big tool in the toolkit that infiltrates many industries. How many, or what's your take on artificial intelligence from a writer's perspective?
It's a really complicated question. And it's interesting in the writing community, you hear many different perspectives. Like I've talked to some folks who are more in the commercial fiction realm, especially romance is an interesting where romance readers are so voracious that to stay current, it's very difficult to keep up if it's just you as a human being. So that there are some people who are kind of seeing how AI can be a tool for building plots, examining characters, and then I think I think most writers that I know who are really engaging in using AI use it as a stage in the process that then they come back and kind of assert their creative experience gets overlaid onto that or like really radically changes it. Fortunately, so far, at least from what I've seen, the poetry world feels like there's the need for the uniquely human. You can still tell when it comes to poetry for the most part, at least everything that I've seen. But yeah, so I think that writers that I know are acknowledging that there's a quality of using the technology as a tool toward their own in their own creative process. And I also just still feel like we're, you know, in in this realm where I think we're trying to work in Jackson Hole Writers too, where we're trying to build community through the written word, that to acknowledge that we really need each other, that the readers who are looking to read poems that speak to them, I think the poets that I know they want to hear from a voice, they want to feel like they're in conversation with a distant human. So I think that impulse toward community continues to feel deeply present in a way that I don't worry about AI, actually. Yeah, people seem to want me to worry about it, and I just keep kind of plugging away at being a human, writing things and sharing it, and connecting with people that way.
I think that's a great approach. We'll end with how we started, which is talking about community and how that really is the glue of an ecosystem. And we focus on finances and money, but we actually believe that something called true wealth has nothing to do with money. It's about experiencing life with a sense of purpose and fulfillment. And many times communities are created in that process, people that you'll meet or experiences that you'll share. What are some of the key things that you have noticed about the Jackson area, or just how that builds community for writers? And would love to hear your closing thoughts on that.
Yeah, what I've loved, especially since coming on and kind of expanding programs at the Writers, I've loved how many people have come to us who are curious about writing, but are trying to figure out if what they're doing is actually writing. We've had that happen several times where, like, we have a regular poetry critique group that's met for years and years, and people will come to the group. Well, I wrote this. I think it might be a poem, and I think you're the people who can help me with it. And like that sort of return to community, that sense that in order to be a writer, I need to have a community, feels really dynamic. That to me, that like the healthy writing life is about the connections with people versus what measurable outputs. That those can happen and those can be marvelous, and that within that, it's that strengthening of a sense of shared passion around the written word.
Love it. Well, thank you for your leadership. Thank you for all the work that you're putting into building community and leading the upcoming conference. So want to say thanks for your time and look forward to staying in touch.
Yeah, thank you so much. This has really been a delight. I'm looking forward to the conference.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a review. To discover what wealth means to you, please take our assessment at planningalt.com.